I didn't plan to find the graveyard. It wasn't on the map I printed, not on the municipal registry, not even in the footnotes of the local history book that has broken spines from being overloved in the library. I found it by accident, by the smell, of all things. I was following a moth-eaten trail at the edge of the marshland, damp reeds brushing my knees, when a cold, sour scent threaded the air. Not rot, exactly. More like damp stone and iron coins held on the tongue too long. I lifted my head and found, between two leaning oaks, a gate encrusted with lichen that no one had opened in years. The bars had been painted black once, then green, then left to rust. If the gate had ever had a name on it, weather had scraped the letters away. Beyond it, the ground rose into a shaded hump under yew trees that held their branches like a hush sign. I could just make out pale verticals among the shadows, stones lined imperfectly, tilting as if listening. I told myself I was here for work. That's what I always say. I make a living gathering the odd stories that lie behind neat houses and nice streets, writing them down, layering them with safe incredulity, polishing the edges so no one has to feel cut. Local lore, my column calls itself, because local guilt doesn't draw advertisers. My readers want to shiver and then set the paper aside. I knew that much better than anyone. I set my bag down on the low wall. It was built of stacked fieldstone, slick with moss, and cold even through my jeans when I hoisted myself over and dropped onto the other side. The earth gave under my boots in a way that made my stomach lurch before common sense declared it was just wet, just the ordinary softness of autumn ground. Inside the yews, the air felt heavier. Not deathly, just denser, like where a room has held too many secrets too long, and breath has settled into the curtains. I could hear nothing beyond my own movements. No cars, no birdsong. The wind played with the yew needles and made a sound like whispered arithmetic. The first headstone I reached was simple, a cream slab with a rounded top and no ornament, leaning toward a fern that had split the soil. The letters had been softened by rain, but still legible. Agnes L. Warren, 1851 to 1880. That was all. No epitaph, no beloved. A neat life bracketed by two small numbers. I took out my notebook and phone, habit. I always sketch a rough layout when I stumble on old sites. Position of stones, varieties of inscription, any features that look stranger than the rest. The work soothes me. It is an act of pretending the world can be measured. I paced along the front row. Simeon Clark, May Hollis, infant, unnamed. The deeper I walked, the more the stones thinned and the ground dipped into long, irregular hollows that may have been graves or just time's idea of a joke. Some of the markers were only slates stuck upright in the ground with letters scratched by hand. One lay face down, a slab half swallowed by moss, and I moved to write it on instinct. I shouldn't have. I know better. Respect your dead, even if they aren't yours. But the itch of needing to see, to know, overruled politeness, as it often does for me. It was heavier than it looked, the way stones often are, and it rocked reluctantly. Under the slab, the earth was dry in a square that had not been touched by rain for years. I caught the smell again, iron and old pennies, and let the slab be. "You're here to look, not to change," I said out loud, because hearing my voice steadied the sudden thump of my heart. The yews collected light and let it drip away. The afternoon dulled toward evening, and I told myself I'd stay an hour, sketch what I could, take a few photos, and go. I found a half-collapsed chapel at the far end of the plot, a ruin small enough to be a shed. Its roof had long since fallen, but 3 walls still stood, brick and mortar fused into something like coral. At the threshold hung a rope, frayed and green with damp, the end tied around a rusted hook. A bell must have once been above it, perhaps it still was, hidden in shadow, although I couldn't see a bell shape against the clotted darkness overhead. I switched on the flashlight on my phone and played the beam along the inner walls. Faded crosses scratched into brick. A stone basin with a split lip. And at the back, on a plinth only high enough to be inconvenient, a book. It was not the book I expected. Not a Bible or a hymnal, but something more handmade. Boards wrapped in leather. The kind of leather that keeps the scent of animals, swollen from damp. No lock. On impulse that I dressed as professionalism, I reached out and flipped it open. The first page was blank, the next, too. The third held a single name written in a pointed, careful script. Calvin Brooks. And beneath, not an epitaph, but a sentence. I saw the girl at the bridge and did not stop. My breath snagged a little. It must have been a memorial book, I thought. Someone's idea of recording not what the dead had been to others, but what they had been to themselves. The sentence was too particular to be a pious nothing. It sounded like a confession. I paged backward, then forward. Blank, blank. A name, a sentence, blank. Another name, another sentence. The names matched some on the stones. May Hollis, Agnes L. Warren. Beneath Agnes I read, I watched him hide the box. The letters were faint and spidering with age, but certain of themselves, carved by ink like the ink was a blade. My own name doesn't often look back at me, but I felt something like that when I turned the next page and saw a surname I recognized. Hale. My surname. I'd done stories on 3 Hales in the county, living and dead, all at least 2 degrees removed. The first name here was half faded, and the sentence beneath had bled, as if it had been written on a wet night. It was a better story this way. The chapel answered my held breath with a soft tap-tap from above, like a fingertip on metal. It was nothing, a drop of water, an animal, but every hair on my arms lifted. I told myself to leave, put the book down, pick up the bag, go to the gate, and write about a cemetery lost to time and the sweet thought of how people used to talk to their dead with fewer flowers. I almost did it. On my way back to the gate, the hush deepened. My boot heels made a deliberate sound on the path, as if someone else was matching pace with me but half a step behind. I turned too fast and my light skittered over headstones, catching on the edges of characters, letters that seemed to shift when the beam glanced away and back again. I stood there, making small circles with the light, following it with my hands shaking, telling myself it was the nerves, the caffeine, the way gathering stories distorts the world until it leaks meaning in all directions. Something small clicked close by my ear. I spun again and saw a shape by the gate. A bell, small and black as a thumb, hung from the center bar with a looped wire that hadn't been there when I came in. It swung, barely. Tap, tap. The clapper kissed the bell's rim like a patient tongue. There was no wind. The U-needles were still. The gate didn't open when I pushed it. I already knew it wouldn't. These sorts of things reward denial by making it performative. I could have screamed then, and I suppose I thought it would help, but something about the place knew better. Screaming felt like throwing water at the sea. I went back to the chapel because I wanted walls, even if they were broken ones. Inside, the book lay where I had left it. The rope by the door moved without moving. A trick of the light, I told myself. I set the phone on the plinth and turned on the voice recorder. Alleged forgotten cemetery, I said, my voice starting high and settling lower. Half acre, maybe. 30 to 50 stones pre-1900. Ruin at the East End. Ledger book of unknown origin. Possible posthumous confessional. The word ledger felt apt. It's what this place felt like. A sheet on which debts are tallied. When I played the recording back, out of habit, to make sure I was getting clean audio, I heard words I hadn't said. Say it true, a voice murmured underneath mine. Write it true. The sound was dry, like pages turned without hands. I rewound, played again, focused on the edges of the sound the way you focus on dark water to see what swims there. This time I heard another voice, whispering my surname with a long slur of the L. A child's voice, maybe, or an old one trying to be kind. The sentences on the pages aren't epitaphs, I thought. They are admissions, and they do not belong to the dead. Tap, tap. The bell on the gate kept time with something I couldn't see, and the rope by the door tightened as if a weight on the other end had leaned into it. "Who are you?" I said. It wasn't a smart question. Smart would have been leaving when daylight could still be called daylight. The shadow in the corner opposite the plinth deepened. It was nothing a camera would have found, just a thickness to the dark like old grief. And within it, something shifted like someone standing up from a kneeling position. He stepped forward on silent feet. He was taller than me, the proportions wrong in a way that made me want to apologize for looking. Clothes that weren't clothes, that were the idea of a suit that had forgotten how to be cloth. Around his neck, a rope, not as a noose, but as if he had once rung a bell so long that the rope had grown into him. When he lifted his head, I saw a face like a piece of paper folded too many times, creases intersecting in a geometry of restraint. He had eyes, yes, but they were not what drew mine. It was his mouth, It was not sealed in any obvious way. There were no stitches, no thread, no glue. It was simply closed with the quiet of a door that has been closed for a very long time. "Say it true," he said, without opening it. "Write it true." "I don't know what you want me to write," I said. My voice failed at the end, like a pencil going blunt. The rope at his neck flexed. The bell at the gate answered. Tap, tap. The graves outside held their breath. "Start with what you didn't put in the last story," he said. He did not ask a question. He cited a fact. I knew then. Not because I am wise, but because my stomach moved in a way it knows to when a truth I've avoided brushes past like a stranger's coat. 2 months ago, a girl went missing. Mara Cates, 20, last seen leaving a diner by the freeway, caught on a camera that made the whole night grainy and opened. I had written about it, the candlelight vigils, the footprints found and unfound, the way everybody in town hoped while they rehearsed grief. I found her mother in her kitchen where the wallpaper had peeled away from the corners like a mouth tired of holding itself shut. The story did well. I wrote a follow-up about the prime suspect, the boyfriend with a temper and a history. It did even better. I did not write about the night I drove home a week before she vanished, how I saw a car pulled onto the shoulder near White Bridge with its hazard lights ticking like a metronome left on top of a piano. I did not write about how I slowed, then didn't stop, because it was late and men had followed me to my door before. I did not write about how the next day I took the long way to avoid the sight of that shoulder. It was late, I tried. It was dark. I didn't say it true. I could have argued. I could have said I owed no ghost a confession. I could have insisted I am not a hero and never asked to be one. But my mouth knew better. It opened and let the truth through like water under pressure. I didn't stop, I said. I thought about all the stories I've written where someone stops and something bad happens, and I thought about how tired I was, and I made a choice that felt small enough to be safe. It wasn't about her. It was about me. There was a sound then, immediately, like a breath released by an entire building. The graveyard shifted minutely, stones straightening in their beds. Somewhere a bird made one small, hard note. The man with the rope for a neck, if he was a man, tilted his head. The folded lines of his face softened. "Write that," he said. "How?" He turned toward the book. I hadn't noticed that the pages had begun to curl at the edges, pulling themselves open like a thirsty mouth. The ink bottle I had not seen before sat by it, black as its own shadow. Beside it a pen with a shaft made of something like bone. I reached for it and didn't reach for it. My fingers hung above the pen, above the book, above the choice. "If I write it," I said, "what happens?" "What always happens," he said. "A truth is placed where a lie stood. The weight changes, something falls, something rises. And if I don't," he looked at me. The rope at his neck went taut. Outside, the earth sighed again in a lower register, and I felt a cold pressure around my ankles, like the ground had slipped its hands up around my boots and was deciding how well I fit. I picked up the pen. The first line I wrote was my name. It didn't look like mine at first. It looked like I was imitating someone else's hand. Then, as the shapes grew familiar, it became mine because I was there to make it so. The second line started itself. I did not stop. The words crawled out of me, not by force, but by a relief so terrible it felt like pain. I wrote about the shoulder. I wrote about the lights ticking. I wrote about being small and being afraid of being smaller. I wrote that I had called no one, not then, not later, because I had imagined the questions the police would ask and how my answer would not be enough. I wrote that when I learned the girl's name, I remembered that night and kept the memory where I keep other difficult things, behind the ambition to be useful. When I finished, the pen felt light in my hand, as if it had used me as a conduit and now had less to move. The book drank the lines I had laid down. The letters darkened. Then they dried and settled. The bell at the gate stopped. The rope by the door relaxed. The man, or the idea of him, stood without moving. His eyes were not kind, but they were not cruel either. They were transactional. An entry had been made. Accounts adjusted. "Is that all?" I asked. I heard in my voice the hope that a child has when she's confessed the smaller thing and hopes it will cover the larger one. "For now," he said. A breeze found the chapel then, a real one, the kind that shakes leaves and carries the smell of water. Above us, a crack of sky between the broken rafters went a shade bluer. The world felt like itself again, irregular and brightening. Footsteps that were only mine led me to the gate, which opened when I touched it. The bell hung silent and still. I climbed the wall as carefully as if it had become a living thing. At the top, with one leg over, I looked back. The man was gone. The book lay closed on the plinth. The ewes held their counsel. I went home by the long way without intending to. My mind kept adding to the confession in a soft whisper, as if I could write it better now that no one demanded it. At every stop sign, I looked in the rear view. That night, I posted a new story. I wrote about the graveyard, but not like I usually do. I did not make it a charm against fear. I did not make the darker facts pretty. I wrote about the gate and the rope and the book. I wrote my sentence. I did not stop. The column went live, and my phone vibrated itself toward the table's edge with messages that knew the sound of a stone being dropped into still water. When I tried to sleep, dirt tapped softly in the wall behind my headboard like a fingernail against plaster. Tap, tap. I thought of the bell. I thought of the man with a rope for a neck. I thought of the new weight on the ledger page where my name had been written. A truth placed where a lie stood. Something falls, something rises. 2 days later, the police found a car in the water near White Bridge. Mara wasn't in it. There were footprints rising from the riverbank in a pair, then a single set going into the trees. I wrote nothing about it. I waited. Sometimes a ledger balance is slow. This morning when I opened my front door, there was a small rectangle propped against the step. It was a bit of slate, edges chipped, cold as if it had learned to be at ease among roots. On it, faint at first and then clearer when I looked longer, my name. And beneath it a space, blank and humming, like the white of a page before words find their way. A wind moved down my street and found nothing to disturb. Neighbors watered their geraniums. A boy on a bicycle checked his phone and rolled away, leaving a sound like laughter broken into pieces. I brought the slate inside and leaned it against a stack of old papers. If you asked me what I'm supposed to do with it, I would tell you I don't know. Maybe carry it back. Maybe keep it like a mirror I don't yet dare to look in. Tonight, I will try to sleep. When the tapping comes, I will tell myself it is only the house settling. If it is not, if the graveyard has hands that reach at a distance, I will set the slate on my desk and leave a stub of chalk beside it. I am learning the language of this place. It is not haunted by the dead. It is haunted by the truths the living bury and the way those truths push upward over time, lifting stones, shifting ground, finding the seams in the quiet. If I had to name the threat, I would not call it a ghost. I would call it accuracy. On my desk, my notebook lies open. The last line I wrote before I closed it at the chapel has bled through the page the way ink does when it's given too much to hold. The words shine a little in the lamplight, as if still wet. Say it true. Write it true. I hear the bell, tap, tap, and I don't know yet if I will go back. I took the sublet because it was cheap, and because at the time I believed that any bed was better than no bed. The listing was 3 dim photos and a line of text. Quiet attic room, month to month, key under the terracotta frog. It sat over a consignment shop that specialized in wedding dresses, so even in daylight the stairwell felt haunted by forgotten ceremonies. Lace sleeves brushing my shoulders as I carried my suitcase up, a drift of mothballs and wilted flowers sneaking into the back of my throat. I told myself it was quaint. I told myself the sea air, just 2 streets away, would scrub everything clean. The room was narrow, the ceiling pitched like a tent. A single window offered a slice of street, a rectangle of winter sky, and the hunched shoulders of row houses. The bed was pushed into the eave, a low double with a nubbly coverlet the color of tea. It creaked when I sat on it, and the mattress shifted as if the springs had learned someone else's habits and were reluctant to accommodate mine. The landlord, a woman named Lenore with a scrambled voice, had left me 2 mugs and a kettle with a scorched bottom. "It's an old place," she'd warned. "Don't move the bed. It keeps the room balanced." I thought she meant the awkward angles of the roof, some torque only a long-time tenant would recognize. That first evening I unpacked slowly, folding the few clothes I'd bothered to bring into the crooked dresser alongside stray buttons and an old playing card. I flicked off the overhead light and turned on the lamp, yellow, forgiving, almost warm. Down on the street, a bus wheezed by, and somewhere a metal sign banged against its bracket. Still, it was quieter than my previous place, where neighbors argued through the walls like they were trying to saw their way out of each other. I made tea that tasted vaguely of pennies and sat against the headboard with my feet propped on the quilt, letting the day drain away. It started with a small sound, so ordinary that I missed it. A soft, exploratory tap, like a fingernail on wood, directly beneath my calves. I thought of mice, then of pipes settling. The building sighed around me, old timber flexing in the cold. A second tap, deliberate, patient. I set my mug down and froze, because finally I recognized where it came from. Under the bed. I told myself the floorboards ran hollow there, that my weight shifting created echoes, the way a bathtub makes its own noises if you listen too closely. I leaned over and lifted the quilt to look. The space beneath the bed was shallow, the frame sat low, the slats shadowing the floor. I could make out the bare boards, dust like velvet, a single bobby pin dulled with lint. It smelled like dry wood and the underside of old fabric, something that had been heated and cooled dozens of times. Nothing moved. My eyes invented motion anyway, the way shadows seem to breathe if you stare long enough. I lowered the quilt and laughed, because people always laugh when they're by themselves and don't want to think about what they heard. I put on a podcast to have a human voice in the room, and the host told a story about a haunted lighthouse in a voice like a reassuring uncle. When I finally clicked off the lamp, the dark in the attic felt close and textured, a living thing that brushed my face when I breathed. The mattress had a dip in it that pulled me to the center. I imagined someone else's sleep pooled there and tried not to think about it. The second I closed my eyes, I swear it, the bed lifted a fraction and settled, as if someone beneath had shoved up with a palm and then slid away. My heart thudded, hard and mechanical. It's an old place, I told myself, balanced. Don't move the bed. Mouse, pipes, a sea breeze pressing just right. I did not sleep well. I woke every hour to the sensation of proximity, as if the space under me had been densified with breath. Once, something cold grazed the underside of the mattress. No sound, just that minute lifting and the hush of fabric against wood. At 3 a.m, I sat upright, fingers gripping the coverlet like a handle, and told the dark that it was ridiculous and that I needed sleep. The dark continued doing what it does best, nothing, impeccably. In the morning, everything had the bland, overlit quality of doubt. I could see the source of certain noises now. The sign on the shop front clacked in the wind. A branch ticked lightly against the window frame. The kettle's lid rattled when the water boiled. I slid the bed out a few inches to plug my phone charger into the outlet behind the headboard. The frame shrieked against the floorboards, and for a moment, the house itself seemed to hold its breath. That night, the cold started earlier. I felt it sneaking up my shins while I read. My toes went numb under the covers in patchy, breathtaking bursts, as if little mouths were taking sips of heat. The tapping resumed, but there was a new sound with it. A drag, soft but moist, like wet paper sliding across wood. It came in gentle strokes, a janitor cleaning up a spill, and it moved and then didn't, paused and then slid again. When I lifted the quilt to look, the air under the bed seemed darker than the room, thick as ink, and I got the dizzy impression that the boards were not where they should be, that there was depth where lack should have been. I told myself to stop dramatizing an ordinary bit of shadow. I dropped the coverlet back down and found that my hands were shaking anyway. I texted Lenore, "Do you have like a pest guy? Think I'm hearing mice." Her reply came 15 minutes later. "Keep the bed where it is. Don't let your feet hang." I stared at the screen, reread it, and the back of my neck went tight. I started to type a reply, what, why, but I erased it and chose not to know. The brain can be good to you that way. It lets you hold contradictory beliefs in adjacent rooms and tells you it's a duplex. At 2 a.m., a whisper slithered up through the mattress. I didn't hear words, just texture. Breath filtered through fabric, a thread unraveling, a dampness barely there, the suggestion of a tongue. I rolled and pulled my feet up instinctively. The bed lifted, settled, lifted. Not much, just enough to prove the presence of a will spending itself on me. Very slowly, I slid my hand to the nightstand and turned on the lamp. Half the bulb sputtered out. The room soaked up the weaker light like a stain. I felt condescended to by the dark. A laugh cracked out of me then, but it felt misaligned from my mouth. A laugh borrowed from somebody who thought all of this was funny. I'd had enough. I flipped the quilt aside and dropped to the floor, my palm landing on wood cold as bone. "Okay," I said, because speaking is the cheapest kind of courage. "That's enough." The space under the bed did not look like the space under a bed. I had to admit it, if only to myself. The shadow there was saturated, as if layers of absence had been lacquered onto the boards. The light reached under and seemed to end too soon. I slid my phone under as a test. Just a little, just enough for the camera to see, and took a picture. I expected to look and find a blank darkness and feel foolish. Instead, I saw the underside of the bed slats cross-hatched with narrow, frantic marks. At first, I thought they were scratches from springs. Then I zoomed in. Words, thin, paltry letters carved with something dull. "Don't look down." Next to it, shaky and smaller, "It wears me when I sleep." Below that, in a different hand, more careful, "Salt in the dishes. Don't move the bed." A shallow, terrible awareness slid into me. I eased the bed away from the wall another inch, and the frame made that screaming scrape. I peered at the legs. Each one sat in a shallow saucer, crusted white along the edges. I touched the rim, and the crystals broke under my finger with a soft crackle. Sea salt, maybe. I thought of shifting the bed earlier to reach the outlet, and felt a nausea that wasn't entirely in my stomach. One leg had jumped its saucer. I must have done it. The salt was scattered like a broken halo around the footprint. I swallowed. I did not want to believe that anyone, had poured salt under the bed to keep something under the bed. I especially did not want to concede that I now, by my small, thoughtless action, had made my bed available to whatever the salt had been keeping away. But there it was, my belief, as reluctant and practical as a factory worker showing up for a shift. The room waited, listening. "Okay," I said again, but this time it meant nothing. The drag resumed, no longer exploratory. It came from under my calves, under my knees. A weight pressed upward directly beneath my shins, hesitated, then pressed again. The sensation was specific and unbearable, like a face pushing into the underside of the mattress, flattening mouth and nose, seeking purchase. I backed away on my hands, stupidly trying not to turn my feet toward the open edge. I reached for the salt saucer and tipped it, trying to rebuild a circle with my hands, but the grains felt greasy, damp with something that wasn't water. A sound piped up then, a tiny, precise, wet click, like a tongue unsticking from the roof of a mouth. Inside my head I heard my own voice, perfectly reproduced, sighing my name the way I would in frustration. "Come on." The bed lifted, thumped. The lamp flickered, and the shadow underneath rippled, thickness drawing and redrawing as if the space were breathing. "Lenore," I whispered to the phone, which had somehow migrated to the far side of the bed, its charging cord trailing under like a lure. I reached for it without thinking. A cold pressure slid around my wrist and tightened, not like fingers, but like a ring made of flexible ice, and with a sharp, childlike tug my arm was yanked toward the gap. The angle was wrong. My shoulder protested, and then went numb. Panic licked up my spine like a match flare. I grabbed the bed leg with my free hand, and the metal frame shuddered. Somewhere in the wood a screw gave the tiniest squeal, an intimate sound of surrender. I thought of those carved words, "Don't look down," and made the mistake of doing exactly that. I looked. I did not see a face. I saw my own hand disappearing at the wrist into a dark that had acquired depth, as if a second floor existed below the floor, a hallway in wet negative. And in that dark something moved in mirror of me, a pale shape reaching up, palm open, fingers splayed, expecting my hand the way a body expects its own footfall. It was myself. Of course it was. Not a double, closer, wronger. Surface tension stretched thin over something waiting to step through. My own mouth, inside that narrow inverse, opened. My name arrived from the mattress. Come on, in my voice, only a shade to the left, like hearing a recording from a day I was sick. I closed my eyes and screamed without sound. The ring around my wrist tightened. I felt the tug not just on my arm, but in my throat and behind my eyes, a suction at the borders of being, edges loosening. It wanted me to be where it was so it could be where I am. So simple, I could have laughed if I wasn't busy coming apart. The saucer under the front leg rattled. The bed shifted. The circle of salt broke again. Instinct took over, cheap, ancestral. I yanked the leg up and slammed it down, grinding the saucer into powder, scattering crystals into the dark. The thing under the bed hissed, not a sound exactly, but a reversal of sound, and in that hiccup I tore my arm back, skin slick and numb. I crawled backward in a crab walk, dragging the salt dish with me, and throwing it down in a messy line between the bed and the rest of the room. The shadow under the bed surged against the line like a wave meeting a seawall. It broke, recoiled, and bunched itself, thickening, looking for a place where the wall thinned. The lamp dimmed to a bruise. The window, black and useless, coughed up my reflection and then swallowed it again. The bed lifted, higher this time, the frame complaining in a voice like rust. Something was angry with a miser's neat fury. The salt line glistened and held like a promise made to a child. "Don't move the bed," I said out loud, because repetition can stitch you to yourself. "Don't let your feet hang." From under the bed, patiently, my voice said, "Don't be childish." The restraint in it was terrifying. The entity had learned me in minutes, like a hand learns a glove. My arm throbbed. I could feel 5 precise cold cuffs on the underside of my forearm where it had held me, though I'd seen no fingers. I reached for the kettle, stupidly thinking hot water would be useful against a thing that didn't exactly have temperature. I plugged it in and the room flickered, the electrical circuit and my fear sparking in tandem. The kettle awoke with a rattling sigh. Under the bed, a slick shuffle, then stillness, as if it were listening to the sound of boiling, trying to decide if it cared. When it clicked off, I gripped the plastic handle and pitched the water across the salt line and under the bed in a low, violent arc. The hiss I got then was real, battered with air, high and quick as a punctured tire. The mattress lurched, the coverlet rose like a startled animal, and then collapsed. Steam curled from the gap, bird-bone white. I didn't wait to see if it mattered. I dragged the bed back into position with a strength I would only think about later, jamming each leg into its dish, building the salt back up with greedy handfuls, coughing when some ran up my nose, not caring when the crystals bit into my wrist. The room muffled, as if cotton had been stuffed in its ears. The shadow under the bed settled. What sound persisted was smaller, like someone talking to themselves in another room where they couldn't quite be heard. I backed to the closet and sat on the floor with my knees to my chest and my back against old wood. The adrenaline drained out of me in rations, and I shivered hard enough that my teeth ticked together like beads. Outside, dawn grudgingly began its gray labor. When Lenore knocked at 8, I had already packed. It was a child's packing, everything grabbed and stuffed, no thought for order. She took one look at my arm and the salt-scummed floor and nodded as if I'd done an errand she'd meant to ask me to do. "It doesn't like boiling," she said, staring past me toward the bed. "It cools, but it doesn't like boiling. You knew." My voice sounded flatter than I expected it to. She made that scrambled sigh. "You read the underside?" I nodded. The carved letters felt like a splinter in my head. "I told you not to move the bed," she said, not unkindly. "It slops out if you change the geometry. It prefers shadows under a mouth. Doesn't much like open spaces. I thought you'd be all right." "You thought," I said. My body was shaking again on delay. "Is that what happened to the last person?" She looked at the window. The street was a pale strip. Some folks leave, some folks stay and learn not to look. She reached for the kettle and winced, as if it were an animal. "You're leaving," she observed. "Good. When you get home, keep your bed on bricks. Tuck your sheets in tight. Don't let your feet hang." She hesitated, then added more softly, "And don't answer when you hear yourself." I wanted to say a lot of things about liability and ethics and maybe arson, but in the shock of surviving, what I felt most was a torque inside me, a slightly wrong alignment, like the way your tongue worries an aching tooth. It wasn't pain. Pain announces itself honestly. This was more a coolness that persisted, a small seam running the length of my forearm where that ring had gripped me. I had the sudden childish urge to put my hand back under the bed, to settle something with a last touch. The urge terrified me more than anything else had. I left. Of course I left. The terracotta frog swallowed the key as if it were glad to have it back. The bus smelled like diesel and tired people. By noon, I was home. Home as in not the attic, not that mattress, not those carved words. I took the mattress off my bed and leaned it against the wall. I set the frame on stacks of books, and when that felt like superstition, I did it anyway and added bowls of salt under the legs, feeling stupid and precise and profoundly alive. That night, my room felt like a room again. White radiator ticking, neighbors' music like a thread up the vent, my own lamp casting a small, cooperative circle. I lay down with all the lights on and the fan whirring like a protector. An hour later, when I finally fell asleep, I dreamed I was a sheet being pulled smooth, the creases pressed out, the corners tucked. It was not unpleasant. It was efficient. I woke with my hand hanging off the edge. I pulled it back quickly, heart stumbling. The room held still, interested. From the ordinary dark under my bed, just as my rational mind was about to laugh at me, came a single sound, a wet click, exact and polite as a greeting. Then, clear as my own voice talking into a mirror, I heard just once, as if to be helpful, "Come on." I only booked the Gable House because the conference hotel had unexpected maintenance. The email rattled into my inbox just as the train slid into the city under a rain-black sky. I could have gone anywhere, but the Gable House had a vacancy, and I was too tired to argue with fate or the weather. The lobby was older than the photos, shadowed wood paneling, a chandelier that clicked as it cooled, and carpet with a vine pattern that made you feel like you were stepping into something alive. The clerk looked up from a ledger as if I'd broken a rule by arriving. "You're fortunate," he said in a voice that sounded like the paper he was turning. "We've got a corner room." He slid a key card toward me. Its white plastic had a faint gray smear along the edge, as though it had been held by a lot of anxious hands. The number stamped in brass on the paper sleeve caught the light. 219. "You're on the second floor," he added, maybe noticing the flicker in my expression. I don't know why the number unsettled me. Maybe it was the symmetry. Maybe the way the lobby clock, a big-faced thing over the elevator, ticked from 218 to 219 as I slipped the card into my pocket. The elevator's mirror had enough silvering scars to make me look like several versions of myself jammed together. I pressed 2. The car rose with a chainsaw grind and stopped midway, jolting me against the railing. The floor indicator, those old glass windows that flipped numbers, clicked past 1, then 3, then hesitated, and finally fell into 2, as if the building had to talk itself into letting me out. The hallway smelled like lemon cleaner braided with a wet, throat-catching damp. The vines on the carpet coiled toward a corner. Every few feet, the wall lamp's frosted globe dulled out for a second, like a blink. My footsteps made a hush on the carpet that felt too loud anyway. 219 sat at the far end, tucked into the elbow of the corridor, the kind of door you don't see until you're right on it. The brass digits leaned, not quite level. There was a "Do Not Disturb" sign hanging backward on the knob. I turned it around, not sure why, and tried the card. Red, then green. The bolt slid with a heavy throat-clearing sound. The room was cold in that hotel way, air conditioner humming behind a slatted grill, the hum shaped like a word I couldn't catch. The bedspread was tucked tight as a drum. A single upholstered chair faced the bed from the window, like it had come to watch me sleep. A painting over the desk featured a lake at dusk, and a smear in the clouds that might have been a bird if you were feeling generous. The TV stared at me in silent black glass. A line of tiny white hotel soap sat on the bathroom counter like teeth. I set my suitcase on the rack, booted the TV to a news channel for company, and called home to say I'd arrived. My voice sounded as if I'd already walked upstairs to talk to myself in the bathroom mirror. Too bright, a thin echo in the receiver. The signal fuzzed twice. Each time, the news anchor's mouth lifted and then caught, a puppet with a jammed string. Once I'd brushed my teeth, I stood at the window and lifted the shade. The glass offered back my face and the neon cascade from a kebab place 2 floors down. Rain angled across the streetlights like thrown nails. In the reflection, the chair framing me looked like a second person in the room, turned slightly, as if it were keeping me in the corner of its eye. "Don't be weird," I told myself, and laughed, and heard the laugh bounce soft from somewhere else. It began small. A tick in the vent that wasn't a tick but a rapid breath. The closet door easing open half an inch, and then pretending it hadn't when I looked. The TV remote refusing to change channels unless I pointed it at the mirror instead of the screen. Old building, I said, because that's the incantation adults use instead of prayer. I set my phone alarm to 6:30, dropped into bed, and let the hum of the air conditioner turn into ocean noise. The sheets were slightly damp, the kind of damp that isn't moisture so much as memory. I turned on my side and faced the chair so it could stop sneaking up behind me in my mind. Something tapped in the wall. Not pipes. Not exactly. A sequence, like a fingernail testing a seam. I thumped back without sitting up. It stopped. Then came again, closer, right behind the headboard now, and I sat up, irritated, more awake than I wanted to be. "Hey," I called, hating how quickly my voice hopped toward anger. "Quiet." Silence answered, muscular and smug. I lay back, listening. Minutes stretched. The news anchor's voice, still going, blurred into a murmured sermon, then dropped dead into static. At the edge of sleep, my eyes tracking the room the way a night watchman tracks windows, I saw the clock's red digits crawl to 2:19, and the room sighed, the air changing its weight. The phone rang. I flinched so hard, the sheet tightened around my legs. The ring was not modern. It was the kind of ring that makes you reach for a bell on a counter. I groped for the handset. "Hello?" A hush. Then my own voice, same breath, same organization of syllables, laid over itself like tracing paper. "Don't let him in." "Who is this?" I sat up, lamp on. The light caught the mirror and threw another room at me, the same room, but a fraction off. The chair was nearer the bed. The closet was open an inch wider. The me in the reflection had his mouth slightly parted, about to say something I hadn't yet thought of. "Don't let him in," the voice repeated, and now I could hear a second thread under it, the clerk's papery tone laid into my vowels, and a third, a whisper from the vent that wasn't words so much as the feeling of a hand hovering over your hair. 3 knocks landed against the door. Not polite, not exploring. 3, 3, 3. "Front desk," called a voice I didn't recognize at all. Too cheerful. "We like to check in on our late arrivals." I put the chain on before I even reached the door. Through the peephole, the hallway fish-eyed and the world smeared into curves, but I could still make out a blue blazer with a name tag that reflected the light in a thin white dash. The person's face was too close to the door, the cheek flattening against the wood as if they were trying to listen through it with their skin. The "Do Not Disturb" sign on the handle swung gently, though the air in the corridor was still. "I'm fine," I said, "thanks." The smile didn't move, but I could tell it was there. The name tag was blank from this side. The head tilted, listening. A fingernail scratched the seam of the doorframe. "Hotel policy," the voice sang. "We just need a signature." My eye burned. I stepped back. The mirror caught me retreating, and this time the me inside it didn't move with me. He stayed, eye pinned to the peephole, one heartbeat longer than I had. My scalp tightened. The tapping began again in the wall. A long, patient stroke like someone feeling out plaster. Then from under the bed, a gust, the heavy, dusty smell of old carpet and lost things, as if something had just exhaled from beneath me. The mattress barely lifted, a ripple traveling along it toward my legs. I grabbed the chair and jammed it beneath the door handle the way people do in movies, and only later realized, who was I trying to keep out? The man in the hallway? The thing behind the headboard? The room itself had more ways into me than the door. On the desk was the hotel's stationery. The first page had indentations as if someone had written hard on the page above it. I tilted it into the lamplight and read the ghosted lines. "Don't. Look under the bed." The phone breathed at me, the dial tone a long, scorched ribbon. I killed the TV with a slap. The room fell into a softer darkness. The only light came from the clock, still, inexorable, 2:19. It had been that for as long as I could remember looking, which suddenly felt like too long. In the mirror, someone shifted under the bed exactly as my bed did. The sheet dimpled in the same spots, the same ripple drifting toward my legs. But there was a wrongness in the timing, half a beat behind or ahead, and when the ripple reached my knees, the me in the mirror glanced up at me, pleading, a flicker of something that was not my expression screaming behind my eyes. I lifted the bedspread. It shouldn't be possible to describe a darkness as wet, but that's what it was, a darkness with density, with shine, with a depth that looked like it would accept you. The bed's shadow swallowed the lamp's light. In it, something breathed, not the comforting rise-fall of an animal, something that didn't know what lungs were but had decided to try. A hand came out, palm up, like a castaway's hand finding the edge of a boat. Gray as an old photograph, fingernails too long, each edge feathered with dust. It reached for my ankle with the gentlest certainty. In the mirror, the same hand had already closed around my leg. I dropped the bedspread and leapt back, slamming into the desk. The chair under the handle lifted, the door pressed from the other side with a laugh. "Paperwork," the voice crooned. "Just a signature. We'll make it official." The air conditioner changed key. A whisper coalesced in the vent, a voice that wasn't voice, just cold shaped like words. Trade. It pulsed. Trade. The mirror offered me a solution I didn't think about so much as recognize. I seized the desk lamp, yanked the cord from the wall, and threw the lamp at the glass. It struck with a ringing note that climbed into something ugly. The mirror shattered not as a single shiver, but as a series of cuts that walked across the surface, carving my reflection into dozens of me's, each lagging by a breath, each with a different expression. In the fracture, the hand under my bed became 100 hands, and they all reached. The door pounded once, twice, then stopped, as if the person outside had put their ear fully against it, as if they could feel with their whole face that something interesting was happening with me. From under the bed came a laugh that wasn't a laugh, the way static sounds like laughter when you're alone too late. The shards didn't fall. They held, trembling. Behind each fractured me, something stood in the tiny alternate room, a hint, a shade deeper than the air, smiling. In one shard, my reflection turned his head toward me and mouthed the words I'd heard on the phone. "Don't let him in." "Trade," the vent insisted, patient. "Trade." The hand caught my ankle. I kicked, instinctive, boot heel chopping into skin that should have felt like a person's. It didn't. It felt like the folded-up negative of a person, all the parts arranged but pulled inside out. Pain lanced up my leg. I went down hard, shoulder cracking the nightstand, the clock flipping to 2:19, as if it had only been waiting for me to be horizontal. "Okay," I said, "because that's what you say when nothing in your life has prepared you for this, and you have to do something to stay in your own body." "Okay." I grabbed the Gideon Bible, its red ribbon bookmark stuck at, of course, page 219, and slammed it down on the reaching wrist. It should have been comical. It wasn't. The wrist yielded like clay, then snapped back, recoiling, hiss wet with carpet dust. I rolled, jammed my other foot into the shadow seam, and shoved like you shove a heavy door when you're late. The bed frame screeched. The chair under the handle jumped, and the door handle spun against it with a sharp, frustrated click. In the mirror shards, my many faces were a chorus of the same awful concentrate, fear and decision held together by wire. I didn't think. I dragged my suitcase in front of the vent and rammed the luggage rack against it. Humming rose, aggrieved. In the same motion, I caught up the chair and flung it under the bed, legs first, like a spear. The thing under there didn't scream so much as pull the room's silence into a point and throw it back at me. The floor vibrated. The light stripped itself down and came back too bright. Across the room, the door stilled. I used that second. Keys, wallet, phone. I snatched them from the desk as if I were leaving a normal room in a normal rush. When I pulled the chair out from under the handle, the door eased open all on its own, as polite as it had been forceful before. The hallway beyond was empty, lamps in their solemn procession, carpet vines reaching. The clerk's ledger smile flickered across my memory. Corner room. Fortunate. I stepped backward into the hall, keeping the room in view, because I was fully convinced that if I turned my back, the bed would be at my heels like a dog. The door closed as a hand might, fingertip by fingertip, and latched without sound. The number on it, 219, looked a degree darker, as if ink were wetting through from behind. I ran. The elevator took a year to come, and when it did, the floor numbers banged through a ritual I couldn't parse. 3, 1, 2, 9, 1, 2. I pressed the L button 10 times. The car paused between floors and thought wicked thoughts about me. When the doors finally opened into the lobby, it was empty, and for a pulse I knew I had slipped onto a different page of the city entirely. Then the chandelier clicked, the clerk's chair creaked in an empty way, and the front doors hushed apart, letting in a ribbon of damp air that smelled like taxis. Outside, the rain had softened. The kebab place's neon churned the puddles toward a thin, poisonous-looking pink. I didn't look up at the second-floor windows. I didn't need to. I walked until my feet stopped the trembling for me. I found a different hotel, an ugly glass oblong that smelled like fresh paint, not history. At the new front desk, the clerk asked, "Any room preference?" "Anything," I said, reckless with relief. "Anything but 219. He did not type that in. He didn't have to. The screen found it anyway and offered it to him, his eyebrows lifting just enough for me to feel the offer land. "Or," I said carefully, "whatever you have on a higher floor." He looked again. 1708, he suggested. "River view?" Perfect. In the room, the mirror was new enough to be nothing but glass. The bed bounced with the memory of the last guest, not with a pulse. I sat down. My shoulders discovered they had been around my ears for hours. I pulled the hotel stationery to me to write what had happened, because writing makes a shape out of things, and shapes are containable. The pen skipped. The first sheet had indentations on it, a ghost of what someone had written before. I tilted it into the light. He followed me home. I dropped the pen and laughed too hard, a noise that wanted a different name. Later, when I finally slept, I dreamed a room whose number was a heartbeat. I woke at 2:19 to the sound of nothing particular and the sense of a chair turning slightly toward my bed, just enough to keep me in the corner of its eye. I'm writing this in the morning, in a coffee shop with too much light and too many witnesses, in the hope that the world, full of clatter and burnt milk and the hiss of the steamer, can drown out the shape of what tried to make a place for itself in me. My key card sits on the table. It is blank, slick plastic with a faint gray smear on the edge. When I turn it over, just to be sure, the number shows only if the light hits it right, raised under the laminate, never ink, 219, like a bruise that hasn't yet decided to surface. The phone was face down on the tram seat, a black wafer beaded with rain and smeared by a thumb. I only noticed it because the tram lurched and it skated toward my knee, buzzing once, as if clearing its throat. I had never taken that line before, an unfamiliar loop that threaded past old warehouses and a canal where broken umbrellas clung to the railings like drowned bats. I was on my way to a cheap attic sublet a friend of a friend had insisted was cozy, if you didn't mind the ceiling. My duffel thumped against my ankle as I bent to pick up the phone. The lock screen said 017. Beneath the time, a thin red bar pulsed. Voice memos, recording, Ninitaro 12. A tiny waveform crawled against black. The battery was at 13% and not dropping. "Anyone lose a phone?" I asked the tram, the way you ask a crowded room if someone speaks Swahili. You expect nothing. A pair of teenagers glanced up long enough to decide I wasn't worth it. Nobody claimed it at my stop either. The door's side closed, and I stood in a street that didn't quite belong to the city I knew. Brick row houses pressed shoulder to shoulder, one lamp stuttering, trees shedding torn paper leaves. The rain had thinned to a slick mist, the kind that turns the world into a film you don't remember learning to star in. The sublet sat at the top of 3 flights of the narrowest stairs I'd ever climbed, the kind that force your feet sideways. The door was crooked, and the key had to be convinced, not turned. Inside, the space confessed to being a converted storage loft. Sloped ceiling, one skylight, a radiator that ticked with its own heartbeat. There was a bed like a folded cot, a low table, and a kitchen corner that smelled faintly of metal and old tea. I set my duffel down and placed the phone on the low table. The red bar was still pulsing. No notifications, no missed calls, just voice memos, recording. I tapped, and the phone vibrated hard enough to flinch out of my fingers. It returned to the lock screen as if embarrassed. "Fine," I said to it. "You can keep going." I turned on the kettle because making tea is what you do in other people's rooms to make them briefly yours. The kettle on the double burner sounded old and resentful. While it gathered itself, I reached for the phone again and swiped left. A camera icon winked, but the phone didn't unlock. Instead, the audio peculiarly swelled. I held the speaker to my ear. At first, I thought I was listening to the inside of someone's pocket, cotton scrapes, breath, a metronomic thud like a heartbeat. But then, beneath those noises, I heard something that was absolutely this room. The faint tick of the radiator's valve and the thin drip somewhere behind the wall. I glanced at the radiator. It ticked. In the phone, it ticked a few milliseconds before it did here. The kettle shrieked. It shrieked in the phone first, a ghostly banshee wail. I jerked, slopping water onto the burner. The real kettle followed immediately, loud enough that the windows rattled in their frames. It could have been coincidence. It wasn't. I poured the water more carefully than I needed to and pretended nothing was wrong. That's a trick you learn in unfamiliar places, the performance of calm. I made tea, found exactly one chipped mug, and carried it to the low table. The phone lay there with its red LED blinking like a slow eyelid. This is silly, I told myself. Audio lags, digital buffers, your head's full of rain. But then I heard the steps on the stairs through the phone, a careful, deliberate footfall, then another, then a pause, as if the person had miscounted the landings. I froze, tea halfway to my mouth. The attic was the only apartment on the top floor. My own steps were still ghosts in the boards, and yet I heard them through the phone. Climb, pause, climb. I turned down the kitchen burner, because people are more threatening when you can't pretend they're just your appliances. The steps continued to the door, in the phone. I looked at the crooked door. The knob didn't move. Silence. Then, as if the phone had breath it needed to release, I heard a soft scrape, metal on metal, like a key considering a lock. My keys were inside. The bolt was shot. Still, my hand moved to the bolt instinctively, as if preventing something obvious and already too late. "Who's there?" I called into the stairwell air that wasn't yet intruded upon. My voice sounded wrong in the small room. Too bright, too crisp, the way it does when you're speaking to convince yourself that the air isn't already full of an answer. The phone offered a single hollow knock. Not a polite hello, not a threat. The knock of someone trying to remember how human hands negotiate wood. A second later, someone knocked on my actual door. I didn't open it. I didn't breathe. The knock didn't repeat. After a long minute that stretched itself like old gum, the steps receded in the phone audio, down one flight, pause, down again, slower, as if disappointed. The apartment remained quiet, but the quiet had changed. It was a quiet that took something from you to maintain. I almost stopped the recording then. It would have been so easy to hold the power button and let the battery die. Instead, I put the phone on speaker and set it on the table. Its microphone drank the room. I sipped my tea and watched my own breath fog the cold spot near the window. You can acclimate to anything if you measure it in sips. After a few minutes, the audio's subtle lead felt like a weird radio show I had tuned into by accident. I started half playing with it. When I shifted in my chair, the speaker gave me a soft scrape in advance. When I sighed, it offered my exhale back like a prediction. It was such a little time, half a heartbeat, and easy to explain if I wanted to lie to myself. But the steps on the stairs kept rising and falling in it, and the door still sometimes considered itself with a metal breath, and the kettle whistled too early, and my tea slowly tasted like iron. I tried the camera again. This time, the phone allowed the lock screen camera to open. The view was dark, grainy. For a moment, I thought it was showing me the inside of a pocket again. But as the algorithm brightened and edges found themselves, I recognized the slant of the attic ceiling and the 3 faint water stains above the bed in an orbit like a wrong constellation. The room in the phone was my room, but not lit by my lamp. It wore a deeper, bluer night. The skylight in the image was blacker than the one above me, as if somewhere clouds had been painted onto glass. And there was a doorway in the phone view that did not exist in my room. An extra rectangle of deeper dark where my wall met the floor, like a cupboard left ajar at the baseboard. "That's not real," I whispered, because naming helps you lie to yourself convincingly. As if hearing, the doorway in the phone shifted a fraction wider, the way an eye squints if you stare too long. From inside that rectangle of dark came a shape that wasn't a shape, a tide line, a lean, the hint of shoulders that might have been a coat hung on a nail if the coat was also a person remembering how to be. I lowered the phone. No doorway, just baseboard, shadow. I raised it again. Doorway, slightly open. The thing paused in the threshold, as if listening to an unheard rule. The audio, recording, gave me nothing but the radiator's patient tick. I should have turned it off then. I should have slid the phone into the duffel, wedged a chair under the door, and slept. But something in me that wasn't curiosity, not quite, needed to see if the room would admit itself. I held the phone so that the real room and the image room doubled, my hand approximately matching the angle. The camera showed the low table, my mug, my other hand. The lag or lead was gone in video. It was perfectly synchronized. Perfect, except for the doorway and the less than shadow standing just inside it. Where did you find it? The voice came from the phone speaker and not from the air. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even particularly threatening. It was simply present, the way you suddenly realize you've been holding your breath and haven't been breathing the same air as everything else. I lowered the phone. The real room did not speak. The red bar pulsed, recording. Where did you find it? The same voice again, not synthetic, not quite human. It had texture, like whispering through damp cloth. On the tram, I said, before remembering I didn't need to answer electronics like they were policemen. The act of answering was the error. Good, the phone said. The doorway in the phone view widened, and the knot shape leaned as if tasting that word. Good, that makes it clean. Clean. The word lodged like a splinter under my tongue. I felt, absurdly, an urge to apologize to the room for tracking in rain. What are you recording? I asked, because if you keep the conversation moving forward, you don't have to admit the other direction exists. Still, said the phone. I'm recording still. The kettle, as if resentful of being upstaged, gave a last little tremor on the cooling coil. The radiator ticked like a metronome practicing for a recital. Still what? I asked. Still, the phone repeated, and the word did that strange, that unearthly thing where a simple syllable becomes an entire idea. Still like silence. Still like a photograph. Still like a command. Be still. In the phone's image, the knot shape stepped out of the doorway, and I felt cold gather behind my knees as if night had a hand under the table. The shape didn't reflect in the mug or gloss off the table's varnish. It had the kind of existence that refuses surfaces. When it lifted its head, I think it lifted its head, the camera struggled to hold it. It was like trying to film smoke with a compass. A single dainty ping announced a new file in the voice memos app. Still, 10. The red bar pulsed. The lead in the audio returned. Only now it wasn't just my room. I heard the staircase again, but it was wrong. The steps were too soft, like bare feet, and they didn't respect the cadence of the landings. At the door, the bolt clicked in the phone audio. Then, a second later, my bolt squealed and turned with nothing touching it. I sprang up so fast the table tipped. Tea ran in a brown comet onto the floor. The door eased open a fraction, sighed as if relieved, and then pushed inward another inch, the way rooms inhale right before they scream. Nothing stood there. Not in the real air. But in the phone's camera, my doorway was full of it. The knot shape, bulking the frame, no longer content to be a suggestion. It had height that didn't make sense for my ceiling and an outline that argued with itself. When it moved, every object around it edged a little to let it pass, the way people give space to a dog that isn't leashed. It didn't come toward me. It went to the table, to the phone, which was also showing it. It looked down at itself the way you look into a mirror right before you do something you won't forgive. Don't, I said. Not to it. To me. Still, it breathed, and this time the word flayed the room raw. The air stopped. The tick stopped. The sound of the tram in my head, the rain, all of it, stopped. For a second I was a deer pinned by a car's high beams, nothing possible but eyes and the scream of molecules pressed into immobility. It reached for the phone. I saw its hand for the first time. Not a hand, not a paw, not claws. A suggestion of digits where digits might have been if the designer had run out of time. The skin was the color my eyelids show me when I press my palms into them too hard. The only reason I moved was because the mug rolled. A ridiculous clattering sound in the new silence. The handle clicked against the table's edge. That tiny imperfection was enough. I grabbed the phone and backed into the kitchen, breath coming back all at once like a saved file. The camera jittered, the image smeared, and when it snapped into focus again, the thing was closer, not because it had walked, but because the space between had lost an argument. I didn't have a plan. I had an impulse. Kill the bridge. Smash the phone, break the screen, end the recording. That was superstition, not strategy, but superstition keeps you alive as often as it kills you. I wrenched open the freezer, thinking foolishly of cold, of slowing things, of still in the sense of stasis. My hand hit a plastic tray of ice and my fingers stung. The taste of iron came back heavy. The thing reached the threshold of the kitchen and stopped, as if the doorway had a line only I couldn't see. It flexed its almost hand, and the lights dimmed, then surged, then dimmed again. The camera's ISO ramped, and for an instant, as it compensated, I saw its face. If a face is a map you don't have the legend for. Eyes sat where eyes would be, but they were too deep, as if a long, dark hallway had been bored where an iris should be. It was looking, not at me, but at the phone, like a pilgrim at a reliquary. "Stop recording," I told the phone, mashing buttons. It didn't stop. The red bar pulsed, 095959. The next frame would roll it to 10 hours, a clean number. The phone wanted that number the way the unknown wants a name. I lifted it over the sink with both hands, meaning to smash it against the faucet, but I hesitated because it was not my phone, and because we assign morality to objects when we're scared. The thing moved, and that solved hesitation. I brought the phone down on the faucet hard enough to burst the screen into white fractures. The audio died in a thin squeal like floss between tight teeth. The camera went black. The whole apartment took a breath that sounded like relief, and something else too, a small grief for a toy taken away. Silence. No tick. No steps. Nothing. Even my heartbeat seemed to be waiting for permission. I stood there with the broken phone in the sink, my breath fogging up the aluminum, and the only sound was water somewhere deep in the building, doing whatever water does when it thinks no one is listening. Very slowly I lifted my head. The thing wasn't in the doorway anymore. The doorway was just wood and bad paint. The extra door the phone had shown along the baseboard was gone too. The air warmed. The taste of iron flaked off my tongue. I should have left then. I should have grabbed my duffel and sprinted down those awful stairs and taken the tram anywhere that wasn't here. Instead, I did the dumbest thing I've ever done in my life. I picked up the broken phone and pressed the power button. It chimed. The screen flickered. The red bar crawled up again like it had never left. Voice memos, recording. "No," I said quietly. No. The phone showed me nothing but static, a drifting galaxy of pixels, and behind it, faint, the still voice that had learned my name in the time I hadn't been speaking it. "Good," it said. "Now you know how to hold still." I dropped the phone back into the sink and ran. My feet forgot how many landings there were too and turned each corner desperately wrong. The front door of the building stuck, fought, then relented with such suddenness that I stumbled into the street. The rain had returned, not mist now but clean needles, and I stood in it until the water washed the taste of iron away. I didn't go back. My duffel stayed in the attic like a shed skin. I slept in a hotel lobby chair with the television playing an endless loop of people smiling. In the morning I considered telling someone, police, the friend of a friend, the tram company, before deciding there wasn't a category for what I'd have to say. But I did not destroy my own phone when I got home. I set it face down on my kitchen table and promised myself not to touch it that night, not to pick it up for any reason. At BuzzTeen, it buzzed once, as if clearing its throat. When I turned it over, it had opened the Voice Memos app on its own. A new file sat at the top of the list. Still, it was already recording. I used to laugh when people said places could hold a memory, like steel could keep a grudge. Then I spent one night at the old yard. The yard sits in a rusted notch of the river where the banks flatten into ash-colored gravel. From the road you see the broken teeth of switch stands and a line of boxcars so scabbed with graffiti they look like bandages. The main tower is a brick cube with its windows filmed white, as if somebody breathed on them and never wiped them clear. The whole place smells like rain, trapped in creosote, tangy, oily, and sweet enough to make your tongue feel coated. I parked by the chain-link gate, logged the time into my little field book, 20:11, and stepped over the fallen portion of fence that scrapes at your pants like a cat. There was a posted sign about no trespassing, but the company that owned the yard folded 20 years ago, and the city has been happy to let the place rot into a rumor. I wasn't there to prove or disprove anything. I make recordings. Real paranormal encounters, my channel says. I keep the camera still, let the mic drink the night, and I don't shout at shadows. I had a shotgun mic, a cold flashlight, spare batteries, and the tiny pocket AM radio my grandfather used to keep on his workbench. He was a car knocker, brake tester, and I liked the idea of bringing a relic that knew what trains were. Ballast isn't made for walking. Every step pushes a stone against the soft part of your foot, and your ankle argues with it. The yard lay quiet, except for the soft chuckle of the river and the wind that moved like water through the hollow spaces of the cars, making notes on whatever it passed. I filmed the tower, the signal mast standing useless, the numbered tracks swallowed by weeds, except for the clean bright lines where people still slipped through. Inside the tower, the air held 3 stale flavors: cold metal, old paper, and coffee ghosts. A calendar from 1999 hung by a single tack above a corkboard pinned with handwritten switch lists. One page was so sun-bitten it was the color of tea. I set the recorder on the desk and let it run. My flashlight grazed the yard control panel, rows of bakelite levers and little colored bulbs like Christmas. All of it dead. You hear things at night that your day brain can't manage. They aren't lies, they're details you don't normally listen for. First came a sound like coins settling in a jar. I told myself it was the tower expanding in the night temperature. Then a hollow knock that rolled along the rails and ended with a small metallic sigh. The sound of slack running out in a coupling. It was an old sound, but it didn't belong to memory. I went to the window. The boxcars hulked in their lanes, but the far signal, one of those tall masts with round lenses, showed a weak yellow eye. It blinked once and went dark. I didn't call out because there was no one to give an answer I would enjoy hearing. Instead, I spoke low into the mic. 2102. Possible residual power to the signal lamp. And then the radio on my belt hissed softly. It wasn't on. The old AM set in my pocket had the smallest crackle, the kind that means you've drifted too close to something hungry for current. I dialed it with my thumbnail, slow and careful. White noise wove in and out. A voice rose like a shape out of fog. Shove 2 to 7, copy. 2 to 7, nice and easy. The voice was ordinary, so ordinary my scalp prickled. Railroad talk has a calm to it. It wears boredom like a jacket, so you don't panic. I turned the radio off. The silence surged back like water. I turned it on again and heard only static. When I turned to set it on the desk, the blue aluminum lantern hanging by the door rolled itself along its hook and settled, as if something had just lifted it and put it back wrong. I told myself that was draft, gravity, my own presence stirring things. I told myself that until the draft became footsteps. They were not clever about it. Gravel reports under weight, it tattles. The steps were slow, measured, and they ended exactly at the base of the tower stairs. I held the flashlight on the door. The wood had the furred look of too many winters. I said, "I'm filming," because that's what you say when you aren't sure whether you're asking for help or giving a warning. The steps withdrew, not in a hurry. Each stone sounded like it was being filed. I went out into the yard. Night had fallen like a lid. The clouds kept the city's orange light for themselves, so the world took light where it could find it, from my beam, from the thin seam of weak sky at the river, from a faint bruised glow near the signal mast that had no business at all. The cold lived in sheets you had to walk through. Between one line of cars and the next, the air would sharpen and your breath would run away from you. 10 feet later, your skin would calm as if stepping out from under a stairwell. The graffiti on the nearest boxcar was a face, big-eared and grinning. The paint had bubbled, leaving its eyes blistered. I breathed out and saw my fog roll against the car's steel. For a second, something darker than my breath moved within it, no bigger than a cat, no heavier than a child's hand. When my light hit that patch of air, there was nothing in it. I took the narrow between track 11 and track 13, ballast crunching, flashlight tracing the railheads. Every now and then, a flick of motion low to the ground, a rat, I told myself. A flick of motion higher, the size of a man's shoulder, wind in a ripped tarp. The masts made their thin wind harp, an organ pipe's worth of mournful notes, and underneath that, a scraping that had a rhythm, metal on metal, turned by a tired arm. I stopped to listen properly, ignoring the way my pulse wanted all the room. Scrape, scrape, pause, clack. Exactly the cadence you get when you spin a brake wheel and the pawl clicks over the ratchet. "Who's there?" I said, because you have to spend that coin eventually. I'm alone. I'm just recording. Static answered from my pocket. I didn't remember turning the radio on. The voice came through as if it had always been speaking, and I had only just tuned into the slice of time where I could hear it. You take that side, I'll take this. Easy now. Blue flag's up, you're protected. Go on, set it. Set it. A word with weight. I panned my light. The blue flag means protection. It's an actual flag or a metal sign clipped onto the rail, used to say, "Don't touch these cars, there are people working." Past the next switch stand, a little rectangle of color sat snug against the web of the rail. I didn't go to it. I stepped around it like you sidestep a snake. The scraping sped up, then stopped. The silence that followed had a tension in it. I felt seen. Not by curious eyes or even hungry ones. The attention felt the way a pair of heavy gloves feels, impersonal, gripped for work. When my light caught the deck of a flat car, I saw footprints across the frost that had gathered there. They were fresh, the melt still spreading, and they were not mine. Each step was a man's size, toe in line with heel, the neat, flat print of someone who knows how to walk steel. 2129, I said for the recorder. Footprints on car 33652, temperature drop of... I pulled the thermometer from my bag with hands that suddenly wouldn't be told. The reader said 3 degrees and falling. My breath thickened. Another breath joined it that wasn't mine, a slower fog that pooled low and dragged on like smoke too heavy to rise. The radio popped. That you in the tower earlier? The voice had a shape now, a timbre that belonged to a man who ate cold sandwiches out of wax paper and kept his hands clean in gasoline. We got a job needs doing. I should have walked back to the gate. I should have told the lens the truth, that I didn't like the way the night stood up around me. Instead I said, "What's the job?" Because the voice had used a trick. It had used the present tense. "Break on the 16 just ran through," the voice said. "Got away from us over the hump. We need you to set it." There was no hump here, not anymore. Hump yards are where you push cars over a small hill so they roll by gravity to their tracks, slowed by iron brakes called retarders. This yard's hump was bulldozed to a sad little knob. It wouldn't bounce a basketball. "You need me to set the handbrake," I said, more to hear my fear pinned to something ordinary than to agree. The lantern by the switch stand flickered. It wasn't a lantern. It was my light kissing a shard of glass and pretending to move. But the space around it felt occupied, as if a shoulder had just passed there. The scrape began again, nearer. It's easy for me to say now that the yard wasn't haunted in the way I had expected. I had come to collect a cold spot, a breath that wasn't mine, a voice that would muddy at the edges when you tried to pull it apart later in software. What I found was work waiting to be finished, work that had never stopped spoiling. The true dangerous thing wasn't the dead men, it was the task. I ducked into the old yard office for heat and a minute of walls. Dust lay in a pewter skin on the desk. I flipped open a ledger with my knuckle to avoid leaving oils and read an entry about a run-through on 13 from October 1979. The line broke where the pencil lost itself. In the margin, someone had written a name I recognized from my grandfather's stories, Klaus. He'd been a car knocker who got his wrist caught and went under when the wheel took his weight. The bottom of the page was gridded with something dark that had dried in a drizzle. I did not touch it. On the back of the door, hung by a nail, was a blue metal sign bent at one corner. White block letters, "Protected, do not move." I took it. My grandfather's rulebook lives in my head the way prayers do for other families. When blue signal protection is displayed on a track, locomotives or cars must not be coupled to or moved. The rule didn't care if a man asked you to move them. It didn't care if the air smelled like iron filings and somebody else's breath. The rule was a knife you could hold. When I opened the door, the yard had gathered. I could sense them not like people, but like positions. The way wind occupies a doorway, the way fog has edges. Lantern echoes drew a dim line down track 13 as if marking distance. The radio sighed. "You coming?" I hung the blue sign on the web of track 13 and said out loud, so the camera would have it, so I would have it, "Blue flag protection on 13. The scraping stopped. The night tilted, listening. For a heartbeat, I felt a pressure I can only describe as irritation. Not anger, that has teeth. This was the feeling of a wrench you need not being where it lives. Then the irritation sloughed away and the lights shifted, faint as a breath on a mirror. They pivoted toward track 11. "Fine," the voice on the radio said, and now there was someone else on the channel. I heard the ghost of a laugh inside the static. "We'll take 11. I ran. I didn't know the yard well enough to do what I did. Panic made the map for me. I cut the corner at the switch stand, stumbled in ballast, tore skin on my palm without knowing, and reached the little iron lever half buried in weeds that lay like a snake along the tie. A derail. A simple wedge of steel that flips up to bump a wheel off the rail and stop a car before it can go where it shouldn't. It was locked open with an old hasp. The lock had died of neglect. I ripped at it, felt the brittle husk of its shackle turn to crumble under my hand, and kicked the derail into place. The wedge stood up sleepy and stubborn. The yard objected. It did it with sound. A far whistle blew, not the clean lung of a modern diesel, but the throatier cry of something that burned hotter. It cut once and left the echo to fold itself. The rails sang. I have heard rails sing before when trains run. They hum, they murmur a little, like conversation in the next room. These rails burned with a clean, high note that sat on top of the others like a cup left on a table where sound could gather. It was a song with a center to it. It wanted my attention the way a hot element does. Light moved then. Not light my eyes could measure, light my bones did. I stepped back, almost onto track 13, and the blue sign bit my calf. It hurt, and I blessed it. Down track 11 came a shape that had no business moving. A single boxcar, its sides blacker than night by 1 degree, shouldered through the dark with enough gravity for ballast to whisper and small stones to click as they kicked. The coupler hung like a jaw. The brake wheel was a circle of darker night. Behind it, a second dark followed, and a third. "Grab the wheel," the radio urged. "Step in on the fly. Easy now? You got it." That voice knew my name next. I didn't hear it in the audio later, but I felt it now. The hard shape of my name fitted into the sentence like a hand into a glove. "Easy now. You got it." The cars reached the derail. Steel met steel. The wedge lifted the lead wheel a fraction, hesitated, then did what it was made to do. The wheel clanged off and ground into ties. Sparks leapt like orange moths. The dark shape bucked and leaned and froze at an angle, one corner lower as if kneeling. The second car's coupler kissed the first with an affectionate slam, and the noise that shot through the yard was pure animal. The lantern echoes went out like pinched candles. The radio went silent. For a moment, the only sound left was my breath and the nervous tick of a cooling flange. Then something breathed near my ear. "About time," it said, a dry grate like wind through an empty valve. My light found nothing. My skin found everything. A shape stood with its shoulder inside mine, using my warmth without apology. I felt the weight of a hand on the brake wheel that wasn't turned. The wheel twitched like the first thought of movement and stopped. The invisible shoulder leaned against my shoulder the way men do when they're telling you it's your turn. "No," I said. It came out wrong, high and small. The shoulder eased off me as if the not man were embarrassed on my behalf. The breath that wasn't mine sighed away. I backed until the blue sign bit me again, and I kept it there, my little domestic patron saint. It should have been ridiculous, a bent square of metal in a world of iron. But the thing about rules is, they make their own kind of geometry. If you've ever worked a place where something heavy can hurt you, you know the difference between a friendly prank and a sacrilege. The world here, whatever dies and keeps dying, whatever repeats until it finds a living body to slot into isometric tradition, honored that little blue square even if it hated it. I left the sign on the rail. I left the radio on the desk in the tower, where it burped static like a sleeping thing. I left the ledger open to October 1979 with my breath moving the curled corner of the paper as if it were a living hair. When I climbed the stairs, the lantern, my lantern, the hooked blue one, rolled again, and this time it stayed rolled, as if someone had given up pretending it had a natural motion left in it. At the gate, I looked back only once. The yard was flatter than it has any right to be when you're inside it. All angles and lines and places to hide. At the fence, it becomes a picture. My flashlight painted one last line across the rails and found the blue sign where I had left it. Beyond it, in the darkness between track 11 and track 13, a little plume of fog rose and thinned. then a second, then none. I don't edit the videos to make things happen. I let them be boring where they're boring. You can watch this one and tell me what you hear. At 21:29, there's the scrape and clack of a brake wheel turned by no one. At 21:33, a voice says blue flag. I swear I said it once. The audio says it twice. And at the very end, when the picture goes grainy and the mic swallows the last of the cold, there's the softest sound of something putting a tool back where it belongs. 2 days later, I went back for the blue sign. It wasn't there. The flag I'd hung on track 13 was. It had been moved from the web to the head, clipped fat to the top of the rail like an announcement. You could read it from the gate. Protected. Do not move. That's the last thing I recorded at the yard. You can call it an ending if you need one. Some nights, when the river wind cuts through the city and my radiator sings, I wake to the feeling of gloves leaning their weight into my shoulder, impatient, reasonable, ready for me to step in. On those nights, I get up and check my door. It's always locked. The blue sign I took from the yard office leans against the wall by my desk, a dented enamel square I don't remember carrying. I could swear I left it. If places hold memory, this one keeps a job card open. It calls through dead radios and blinking glass, and it doesn't shout or beg. It speaks like work does, which is to say it makes the ask sound like the answer. I try not to hear it. I sit with my back to the wall and let the rule book make its box around me. No movement where blue is shown, no coupling, no exceptions. Across the room sometimes the sign's shadow moves like a lantern being set down. And then, even though I'm alone and the night is ordinary and my camera's little red light says everything is fine, a breath that isn't mine fogs the window and writes, plain as a switch list, easy now, set it. I told myself I wasn't superstitious as I slid the key into the side door of Harper & Son's funeral home and felt the night push at my back like a curious animal. The brass turned with a tired click. Inside, the air hit me in a flat wave, cooler than the street, scented with lilies, floor polish, and the faint bite of something medicinal that lived in the walls. I'd said yes to the overnight watch because my friend Mara worked here and their alarm system had gone down in the storm. Just sit at the desk, make rounds on the hour, she'd said, shrugging as if it were no worse than babysitting a sleeping, well-behaved house. Some houses didn't sleep. Mara gave me the tour while I tried not to stare at the caskets lined like heavy furniture in the showroom. Chapel's through there, she said, pointing with a ring of keys. Arrangement office, coffee machine. Down the hall, prep room, cooler. Please don't open the cooler unless you hear the temperature alarm. The family room's locked. They left flowers and don't want them disturbed. She paused by the intercom, an old black box with a row of cracked plastic buttons and a tiny, mean speaker. The intercom clicks sometimes when the compressor kicks in. Don't let it spook you. Noted, I said, cheery because my voice sounded small. Her hand squeezed my shoulder with the pressure of one who'd seen people crumble and was preventing it in advance. The building has its ways, she said, not unkindly. It's not the dead you worry about. It's habit. Places like this are thick with habit. Then she left me with the keys, a half pot of coffee, and a hallway that narrowed as I looked down it, as if the walls were breathing in. The arrangement office had a desk older than my mother, with a bell telephone turned into a lamp. I put my backpack beside a stack of trifold brochures, compassionate care in difficult times. The clock on the credenza, one of those mantelpieces that looked like a small coffin, read 9:17. I walked my first round like a security guard in a forgotten museum. The chapel was low lit, the way cinemas are before the previews, all velvet and dark wood. LED candles made a respectable illusion of flame, their plastic wicks quivering on a programmed breath. The hymn board still held numbers from a service earlier that day. A thin booklet lay open on the pulpit to abide with me. I ran a fingertip over the raised letters and came away with dust the color of antique teeth. The casket showroom was stranger, a room for furniture that rehearsed sleep. Walnut lids, satin cushions, brass handles polished to an unblinking glare. The far wall held a mirror panel, and for a heartbeat, I thought someone else had walked in behind me. My reflection hesitated a fraction after I stopped. I chalked it up to fatigue and the way mirrors carry light like a bucket, slosh it, and it laps back. Down the hall, the prep room door wore a sign, authorized personnel only, that managed to sound embarrassed rather than stern. I used the tip of the key to crack it open an inch, enough to smell stainless steel and formalin and lemon disinfectant. There was a sink with a long gooseneck faucet, a slab like a butcher's table, a coil of hose, drawers labeled with matter-of-fact violence, eye caps, mouth former, suture needle. I closed the door, gently as if I were tucking in a child. Back in the office, I poured coffee. The pot had sat long enough to grow a mood. I cut it with hot water and sugar and called it good. The mantel clock twitched its hands. Streetlight bled through the blinds in thin stripes, dust motes crossing them like thoughtless planets. It wasn't silent, it was the opposite, full of small, loyal noises. The compressor hummed. The elevator muttered to itself, old cables settling. Somewhere overhead a dry pipe ticked with whatever ancient warmth moved through it. I lasted 40 minutes before the intercom crackled. "Hello?" A shiver pinched the nerves behind my knees. I stared at the black box, its red power dot unblinking. "Mara," I said. Static answered, the kind that sounds like someone looking for a word. I pressed the bulked-out gray talk button and felt it resist my thumb like scar tissue. "Harper and Sons, after hours." Shh. The rest was a breath collapsing itself. Then, like a tape spooling up, a voice sharpened. "Director to prep, please. Director to prep." I waited, throat dry, for a second call. None came. The clock now read 9:53. I told myself the building ran on routine. Someone had set the intercom to page the prep room at the top of the hour every hour for a funeral director who had probably retired a decade ago. Still, I made my second round. The chapel was unchanged except for the smell. Sweeter, heavy as syrup. A vase must have cracked or leaked. The lilies poured their ghosts onto the carpet. On the front pew, the cushion held a darker impression, like someone had gotten up recently. I put my hand there. It was cool. In the casket room, a lid had stood itself slightly ajar, the satin pillows inside sloping toward the seam of light. I told myself settling wood is a thing. Air pressure is a thing. Buildings breathe. I closed it with 1-2 fingers and felt the gentle bounce of spring-loaded hinges. The hallway to the back bent fractionally, the way old houses drift in their foundations. My eyes kept trying to make a right angle that wasn't there. At the end, the prep room's viewing window looked into its own blackness. I could see myself faintly, doubled in the layered glass. My face in there was pale and stretched wider, the jaw slack. I lifted a hand. The hand in the glass lifted slower. Cold spread in a star under my ribs. I unlocked the door and eased in. The room was brightly lit and indifferent to me. Tools lined up like grammar, everything with a place. On the counter sat a stack of toe tags, blank, a roll of white string, and a pen that had oozed a little ink onto the paper. The drain in the slab chuckled softly, as if remembering a joke. The cooler, a silver door with a heavy handle, wore beads of condensation that made it look like a man trying not to cry. "Director to prep," the intercom hissed, razor clear in here. It came from a smaller box on the wall under the clock, a twin to the office unit. It made me think of a throat speaking to itself. "It's just habit," I said out loud, because a voice displaces fear, gives it somewhere to sit. I put my hand on the cooler handle. The metal was clean and human cool. I didn't open it. I didn't have to. Through the little square of thick glass set in the door, I saw a row of racks, and on the third, the dark punctuation of a body bag's zipper. The dotted line of its closes and teeth looked like a mouth grimly shut against gossip. The glass held a smeary fingerprint. Mine, probably. That's what I told myself, turning away. Back in the office, the mantel clock read 10:41. My phone said 10:12 and 40% battery. I'd barely used it. I plugged it in anyway and the charging icon appeared, a small mercy. The intercom popped again, but this time it was a woman's voice, delicate and strained. "I'm ready," she said. "I'll see him now." It hooked something low in me, that voice, the way certain keys in a piano can vibrate a cracked water glass. I pressed talk. "I'm not the director," I said. "There's no visitation tonight. I think you have the wrong..." Silence. Then, like an answer from inside a closet, whisper closed though the door was shut, "He wanted lilies." "I know," I said stupidly, like a person in a dream answering a question they've been rehearsing for years. The hallway light flickered. You learn quickly which flickers are electrical and which are eyelids. This was the former. It came back true. Still, I brought my backpack into my lap and unzipped it, revealing the nonsense that passes for courage when you're alone. Flashlight, pocket knife, a book. I slid the knife into my pocket and went to check the doors. The front remained locked. The side door, too. The family room in the corner, though, the one Mara had told me was locked, stood now with its latch a hair off the strike, just enough to show the glitter of the bolt. The air that breathed out when I opened it was warmer, thick with flowers, and something souring underneath like a fruit bowl you've forgotten for a week. The room held 2 couches, a low table with magazines, memorial options, Grief and You, and the flowers a riot of color that refused the house's hush. On the table, a card leaned against a vase, to Nora, with love. He'll meet you where the wind starts. I closed the door gently, more apology than action. Director to prep, the intercom again, insistent now, more like a chant than a request. I imagined a long-ago secretary pushing the button on autopilot, the word director like a prayer she'd worn smooth. The third round I didn't want to make. The walls had gathered themselves by then. Places do this, convene. Even my footfalls changed tone, flattening as if the carpet rose subtly to meet me. The casket lid I'd shut stood open again, wider this time like a mouth working itself toward a yawn. A prayer card had fallen face down. I bent to pick it up, and my own name stared back at me from the printed memorial. In loving memory of my name. Then my name, spelled right, a rarity. My birth date beneath, and the slash, and then nothing where an end date should be. Someone had typed the first 2 numbers of the year and stopped. I dropped it like it had sprouted heat. Okay, I told the room. Okay. When I reached the prep room, the overhead fluorescents had brightened to operating theater white. The small pump on the counter, an embalming pump I realized belatedly, was on and idling softly like something breathing around its own gag. A length of clear tubing shivered in a coil. The break in the sound, the absence wrapped around it was worse. No traffic outside, no compressor, just the pump whispering and the intercom weeping static into itself. On the counter, beside the stack of blank toe tags, there was a new one, the string already looped and knotted. My name was typed on it. The ink wasn't quite dry. When I lifted it with 2 fingers, the letters smudged like mascara. For a moment I stood with the tag hanging from my hand, not quite living in the same second as my body. A tick later, the room delivered an explanation. Some prank by the staff, a thing they did to break in new hires, a terrible joke made worse by grief. But the baseboards of the place did not agree. The drain chuckled again, the little peristalsis of a building that digests. Director to prep, said the intercom, and the voice on it was Mara's. I went cold, not from fear, but from the surety that I had entered a conversation already in progress. Don't, Mara's voice said in my ear. I hadn't touched the button. Don't let it decide for you. The cool room door latch clicked. Not a slam, not theatrical, just the small metal acceptance of a duty done. I turned, and the square of glass in the door reflected the prep room behind me, a too bright duplicate. In that little square, the room was empty. I was not in it. I moved before thought. My hand found the pump's power switch. I slapped it down. The motor whined, dipped, did not stop. I yanked the plug from the wall. It sang on, quiet but undeniable, a determined artifact. The tubing twitched, the way snakes move when you dream about them. In the windowed reflection of the cooler door, movement condensed. Not a person, not even a shape, more like heat, a denser range of air that rounded itself into suggestion. A suit jacket, the knotted negative of a tie, a head cocked with professional attention. He stood where I stood, but offset, as if the room's memory of a funeral director had arrived to resume his post. When I turned, there was nothing. In the glass, he waited. The intercom hissed then, under the hiss, multiple voices like paper being crumpled by many hands. You'll want the lilies for him, the woman again. Director to prep, the building, patient as a metronome. Don't let it decide, Mara's voice, not quite hers, the vowels pulled wrong like a coat stretched over the wrong frame. I grabbed the length of tubing. It felt tacky, warmed by a machine that shouldn't have been on. I plunged it into the sink and twisted the faucet on full. Water blasted, the line went rigid, and a fine mist sprayed into the air, turning the bright light into soft, wet suggestion. The dense place in the glass acquired edges where the mist hit it, just enough to make out a sleeve, a shoulder, a segment of face with no features you could explain later, only an arrangement that said, "Listen to me." The toe tag in my pocket tugged, or else my imagination did. "I'm not your arrangement," I said. The words sounded ridiculous and absolutely necessary. I backed out, dragging the tubing, tracking water. In the chapel, the LED candles trembled at the ring of wet I'd made. I ran to the pulpit, grabbed the service book, flipped until my eyes snagged on words that had known more rooms like this than I ever would. I read in a voice I used at weddings when I had stood up unsteady for friends. "We entrust this one." I swallowed. Then said my own name, feeling something resist in the air, a push against the mouth that wanted to deny I had one, to the mercy of God. Earth to earth, ashes to ashes. The intercom howled, a feedback squeal like a hawk stooping. The mirror panel in the casket room cracked with a sound like ice forming too fast. From inside the family room, flowers fell over as if someone's elbow had brushed them in a hurry. The dense man shape in the reflection surged toward the chapel aisle, shouldered past the air like a swimmer, more suggestion than pursuit, but enough to make my skin try to climb off my bones. I kept reading. I didn't know the rest, so I made it up, a litany of every ordinary thing I could think of. We commit this night to the trash plan, the coffee stain, the bus ride with the wrong change, the breath your grandmother guarded, the breath your father forgot. We commit what belongs to us back to us. The words weren't right, but they were mine, and they made a place to stand inside the noise. The pump back in the prep room coughed and slowed and stopped. The intercom went from scream to hiss to a kind of soft tidal pulling. In the reflection on the chapel's communion table's polished wood, the shape tried to hold its outline. Water dripped from the tubing on my shoulder. A lilied sweetness roared up, suffocating and then, suddenly, thin as if a window had opened. The mantel clock in the office chimed 11. When the house settled, it did it all at once, like someone had redistributed weight in a boat. The air returned to its plain arrangement. The LED candles resumed their idiot blinking. The family room door, when I checked it, stood firmly latched. Inside, the card to Nora had fallen and lay face down, the blank white back a little wet where a petal had cried on it. I found the toe tag in my pocket. My name was still smudged there. I folded it until the paper creased into a stiff, small square and set it under the mantel clock. The tick seemed to accept it. I spent the rest of the night in the arrangement office with the intercom unplugged and the prep room door shut, and I'll admit it, a chair jammed under its handle like a cartoon. I read the service book, then my book, then the brochures. Twice I almost called Mara. Twice I didn't, because saying things out loud can arrange them more firmly, and I didn't want to be arranged. Dawn is shameless. It came in hard and specific, making the scuffed corners of the carpet look like honest work rather than creeping stain. When Mara unlocked the front door at 6:07, the street smell came in with her, coffee and rain on concrete and bread from the bakery 2 doors down. She took one look at me and folded me into a hug without asking questions. Her sweater smelled like laundry detergent and a colder night than mine. "You okay?" she asked. I showed her the toe tag. I told her about the intercom, the pump, the mirror. She listened the way she probably did when a family couldn't decide on hymns, giving tiny nods like soft beats in a bar of music. When I finished, she frowned at the tag. "We don't type names," she said. "We write them by hand." "It was typed," I said, "like on a label maker." "We don't have a label maker," she said. I let out a breath and laughed too loudly. "Okay," I said. "That's worse." She set the tag down and placed her palm over it, as if checking a baking sheet. "Places pick up the worn routes people travel," she said after a moment. "Grief makes grooves. Some nights the grooves try to pull you along. You did right, making your own words." "Is that the trick?" I asked. My voice was light, but there was a tremor underneath it, a new tuning fork in my rib cage that had learned the house's note. "It's a trick," she said. "You can't let the building do the deciding. Not here." Behind her, the prep room intercom clicked once, like a tongue against a thoughtful tooth. We both looked down the hall. She didn't go check. She looked at me instead. "Do you want to work here?" she asked then, quick and not entirely joking. "You have a way. Our night guy keeps quitting." "Hard pass," I said, and we both started laughing. The kind of laughter that's really just air escaping through the hole you didn't know fear put in you. Later, as I shouldered my backpack in the doorway, dawn fully afoot, I glanced back down the length of hall. The cooler's little window winked a square of light. In that square, for the briefest smear of a second, I thought I saw a man adjust his tie and turn away, returning to a part well played. The smudged toe tag rode home with me in my pocket all the same, its soft, folded corners reminding me where it had been. Sometimes in the evening, when something mechanical clicks in my apartment, I hear, "Director to prep," in a voice that's not quite mine, not quite Mara's, and I answer in my head with the only words that made any difference that night: "I'm not your arrangement."